everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Before we get started here, I just want to remind you that one of the ways we keep the lights on is subscriptions through Blaze TV. So if you'd like to support this show and get access to all the material with your favorite Blaze hosts, head over to blazetv.com/Oren and you can get $20 off your subscription today. That's blazetv.com/Oren to get $20 off your subscription today. All right, guys, it's almost the holiday season. You know, we're approaching Thanksgiving. Christmas will come quickly after. And what would it be in the United States if we didn't have a bunch of people telling us that we need a lot of H-1B workers to replace all the lazy Americans during the holidays? So we've seen another H-1B call out. It's H-1B2 electric Boogaloo. We have all the greatest hits. We've got Donald Trump suggesting that American workers aren't smart enough to put together batteries. We have Elon Musk talking about how no one in the United States will do any physical labor. We have Dinesh D'Souza talking about how H-1Bs will teach Whitey how to truly become an American. And of course, we see last year's contestant and winner Vivek Ramaswamy falling behind in his poll to win a governorship that should have been easily handed to any Republican who did not hate the American people. Joining me today to talk about this is one of our longtime favorite guests, the Prudentialist. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me on, Oren. I greatly appreciate it.
Of course. So where to begin? I mean, I've already played the Trump video at this point, so we could probably start there because then we'll have the least to say about that. That one's kind of the oldest one at this point. But everyone saw the last week how Donald Trump was in this interview with Laura Ingraham, and he said, well, ultimately, we have to have H-1Bs because Americans need to be trained on these positions, and we just don't have the talent to do that. Now, interestingly, Donald Trump's selection for an example of the type of training he's talking about is behind a plant in the United States, which was basically keeping over half its staff as trainers from Korea, and they had all overstayed their visas. They were all getting paid pennies on the dollar, but they were training Americans. And when the ICE raid finally came and, the plant got in trouble, Donald Trump acted as if this was some foreign government, like maybe the Biden administration had returned and taken over parts of ICE. He's like, well, and then they went out and raided this. Is like, no, Trump, you did. Like, that's your department. That's your executive branch doing what you were supposed to be doing. But he seemed very angry that this had happened. And there just seemed very, very bad messaging coming back out of the White House on this issue. J.D. Vance has kind of had to come in and try to clean it up. Bassett tried to do the same thing, saying, oh, they're just going to train them for like 7 years. We're just giving them 7-year visas to train American workers because that's long as how it takes to train an American to put together a battery. What's your reaction to kind of the Trump aspect of this absolute cluster?
Yeah, it's been incredibly poor messaging at the moment, especially when I think a lot of people, and again, you have to gauge everything between what's actually been done versus sort of what we see in the online news cycle. I mean, as you and I are talking, it's just a few days since the 2-month anniversary of Charlie Kirk's assassination, and almost immediately any momentum that could have came from that on the right had been immediately squabbled for purity contests and arguments over the issue of H-1B visas or who's an American or how much money we should give to various countries across the globe in terms of foreign aid. So to watch things fracture so quickly is really depressing and heartbreaking. I think that the administration has had some major fumbles with regards to its messaging on visas and H-1B visas because since you had said this has kind of become an annual, dare I say, seasonal event that comes with the holidays. As you'd mentioned at the beginning, you and I were on the air about a year ago on your program to discuss Vivek Ramaswamy's, H-1B crash out over this exact issue. The same thing with Elon Musk almost a year ago to the day at this point, which is incredibly depressing that we're getting to have to do this once again over and over. I think that when it comes to Trump and the Laura Ingraham interview, I think it's bizarre in context because we have to remember that Laura Ingraham kind of did the weird, little Third Reich salute almost for the visual gag during the 2016 Republican National Convention, because I don't think she was very pro-Trump at the time. And then to see her take this angle is really a remarkable change of pace. But at the same time, this administration has done a lot, or at least has tried to. And even in the first Trump administration, there was a reduction in the number of H-1Bs that could come in. I think, however, the way that he took those questions from Laura Ingraham, not to mention that there are more than just H-1B visas. We have L-1, we have the OPT system, and of course, with farm work, you have the H-2B visa system. All these things need drastic reform in order for us to actually put American workers first, rather than outsourcing every little thing imaginable. Because you and I have seen on the timeline and by numerous other writers and sort of data analytic guys that we know that countless H-1B visas are out there, from everything to 7-Eleven to Walt Disney World to every major American tech corporation in the United States. So not the best messaging on Trump's part, but this is in the backdrop of the $100,000 fee that they had put out, which even then that wasn't exactly what we had wanted. And so I think that the administration is trying to, get back on its feet when it comes to this messaging, because for you and I think we all voted for him because Biden opened the borders. I mean, the borders had been open even long before Biden. But I voted for deportations, and I think that he needs to maybe be reconnected with his base and what they want out of that issue.
No, I agree entirely. Someone just pointed out, I think it was Jesse Kelly on Twitter. He said, it's either it's all immigration and inflation. This was what Trump was reelected. Either you fix those two problems or you don't, and everything else is noise, right? Like, ultimately, people might, care more or less about foreign policy, Israel, foreign aid, any of this stuff. But the two things that the base really cares about is that everything's getting more expensive, and there's too many people who shouldn't be here competing for their jobs, driving up their healthcare costs, taking over housing, all of these things. And so those are the key issues. And as you said, it's important to recognize that H-1B has kind of become this now blanket term for all of these work visas. Right now, it's okay. Well, it's all these other programs as well, and they're all being abused. The educational visas are being abused. The agricultural visas are being abused. The work visas are being abused. It's just across the board, and we're just looking for large scale visa reform. Now, it's entirely possible that Trump was just kind of, people have pointed this out. He repeats whatever the last, advisor he had in the room said, right? So somebody might have pointed out, well, there's a difference between, just having people in to take jobs and having people to train or something. But it's very clear from, again, the example Trump gave, which was like the worst possible example, that is not a difference that is delineated enough for the administration. And as you point out, fewer H-1B workers had come in, and they are talking about, they have this $100,000. Now, again, bad messaging on this, because originally it was supposed to be every year, which was definitely going to hurt what that visa was going to be able to do mass immigration wise. When it's just a one-time fee, it's still, at least it's some kind of barrier, but it's certainly not the one we're hoping for. So there's a mixed bag in performance versus messaging. But I think the real problem, the reason that people took issue, was the implication that Americans just don't have the skills. Right. Like it's not even so much the number of people coming in, though that's certainly a huge deal. But it was the first time, I think, Trump has been very good, at least as opposed to everything else, very good on messaging the value of the American people and the American worker. Right. Like that has been the thing that I think people felt Trump was connecting with over and over again. The Rust Belt, the people left behind by automation, by immigration, by globalization. These people were the ones who were fighting for Trump because he was going to bring the jobs back to the United States. And so it's just very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to hear this idea that ultimately just Americans just don't have the skills. Now, don't get me wrong, when you haven't had an active manufacturing program for a while, yes, there is some level of skill acquisition that has to occur. But Trump isn't talking about, building 1,000 technical colleges to reinvigorate American manufacturing and bring the average worker up to speed. They're not even talking about sending one American, to the place where they have this particular skill set, having them learn it, and then having them come back. No, the only option is to bring thousands and thousands of people into the United States to acquire these skills. And in a time where we have, Skype and Zoom and all these internet apps and all these YouTube videos and the way that you could make training videos, communicate that knowledge, it seems like bringing thousands of people over here for 5 to 7 years, the way Bassett was talking about, is just the worst possible way to do this training, which makes me feel like it's not about training at all. It's got an entirely different agenda attached to it. And I think that's what worries people when Trump talks like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like you had mentioned, the H-1B has become the go-to word or term that we use to talk about all work visas. And while America's industrial base has taken a beating over the last several decades, there's probably going to need to be some room or potential option for us to work with allied nations like the Australians, or in this instance, the Koreans. And I think the reason why that had such a blow up the way it did is because of Korean foreign investment in American plants in general, and our relationship to them is, I think, tenuous at best in a lot of ways. From what I was reading out of Korean sources, that it was taken as a big national affront considering how much money they've given in. So I think Trump is trying to balance that line, although I think in this instance it does not come off well after the midst of everything that we've already seen on the timeline and on the news headlines, especially when it comes to this issue. Because as you had said, the two biggest issues out of the 2024 election was immigration and inflation. And neither of those feel relatively under control despite actions being taken. And so the base is angry, and rightfully so. And I think that we need to have a more clear delineation between what kind of programs this administration wants to keep or wants to slash, wants to reform. Senator Eric Schmidt has put out, a great push to end the optional practical training program, which is under the F-1 visa system, which basically just allows for this unaccountable network of student visa holders who can then stay in the country. And then companies that use that system get billions of dollars in tax exemptions every year. So there's a lot that needs to be cracked down. And a lot of this could probably be done without the administration making major moves about it, unless they're going to say, we're officially ending this program. This is what we're going to remove. This is how many people aren't going to come here. We're going to focus on Americans. That would do them a lot of good. But instead, the administration has unfortunately opened their mouths and inserted their own foot in there in the midst of, once again, we're having a debate over immigration, and we're seeing the same usual actors engage in the same kind of ethnic finger wagging, like Dinesh D'Souza, about American workers or those who are capable and to be trained. Because, and to segue into sort of that discussion, while we're trying to reindustrialize, and while this administration, even the Biden administration, whoever was actually running it, understood the national security importance of having basic industry in the United States and not relying on incredibly fragile supply chains where some terrorists off the coast of Yemen can significantly disrupt global trade, let alone everything we learned from COVID. So because we're trying to bring back American ship construction here, we're trying to focus on semiconductor manufacturing here, all sorts of things that are now, of course, thrown in the mix of tariffs and immigration. The administration has unfortunately waded into what has been just the celebration parallax, but from people allegedly on the right. And I think that it's incredibly damning for a guy who wrote a book called The End of Racism to then have his ego bruised by some, travel vlog YouTuber and turn into a blood and soil nationalist for a country that he doesn't associate with. And he's claimed to be, this colorblind, race blind American classical liberal conservative for 30 years. Only to have a greater ordeal of civility we haven't seen since Alexander II.
Yeah, it was really disappointing to watch that crash out. I mean, I've been on Dinesh's show several times, and we've always had our differences, but we've gotten along well enough. I was shocked, frankly, to see him kind of fall into that pattern. Now, he had been crashing out about kind of the Israel issue and everything else, talk about how Jesus wasn't really a Christian, the disciples weren't really Christians, all these things, for a while. So he had kind of been spiraling. I imagine he was probably getting quite a bit of backlash online, some of it somewhat ugly, but when you talk like that and you push that kind of agenda, you're probably going to get some heat. And I think this was kind of just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, probably ultimately for Dinesh. But watching him, just lash out and say things like, "Hey, Whitey, the H-1B guys are gonna outperform you. They're better Americans than you, and actually, we're the ones who are going to take over." Again, it was a little reminiscent of the Vivek. Well, yes, I'm an American. I was born in America, but my immigrant subclass is better than American culture, and we do things better. And you guys are lazy and stupid and play football and watch TV and go to parties. And we're the ones who are going to spelling bees because we're just better people than you. And you could probably learn something from us. it had a very similar quality. And then you look at people like Nikki Haley, the minute that there's some kind of tension with India and she runs out and says, oh no, well, maybe we should disagree, but whatever you do, don't cut India off. And it's like, man, at some point it's hard for me not to notice the trend here. At some point it's hard not to see that over and over again, people who are supposed to be Americanized, many of which have born in America, in the case of Dinesh, coming from I think a long line of Christians because of where he was located in India. I mean, this assimilation process should be pretty far down the line. Maybe not for Vivek. He's like one generation in, but Haley and Dinesh, you think there would be more there. And then the minute some sub-ethnic interest kind of arises in the policy, it's not America first anymore. It's not about, race color blindness anymore. It's not about ending racism and MLK's vision. It's about me and mine, and my people are better than your people. And I can tell they're my people immediately because, he runs out and says, we're doing better than you. Like this, who's the we there? Is it Americans? No. It's very clearly, it's some other group. And so when that's kind of your default response under stress, people start to wonder, okay, what level of assimilation is actually happening here?
Yeah, and I think that this has sort of come back under the discussion about what, I think it's Bobby Jindal, who, again, another, Indian American who ran for president in 2016, and I think has now quietly joined the sort of Make America Healthy Again coalition, kind of disappeared off of the national stage since the 2016 election. But he had famously said, I think on the campaign trail on immigration, a line that I'm sure he didn't come up with, but, one where it was along the lines of immigration without assimilation is an invasion. And whether that's from him or not, besides the point, but it really does come to show that, well, if they're not assimilating, or if they say that they're not, and you scratch behind this veneer of, sort of civic, patriotic American identity, and all of a sudden we're rooting for the people that they actually identify with, well, it raises a particular concerning question about, well, how many people who have immigrated here or even have been born here in multi-generation immigrant families are actually considering themselves to be American and do not have a previous loyalty somewhere else. And I know that a lot of people get up in arms when people say, well, they might be loyal to somewhere else. And they'll say that that's like a canard or some sort of dog whistle, that you're talking about some country in the Middle East. No, it really does apply to almost every group that does decide to come here.
This is just diaspora politics.
Yeah,
it's not about one group or another.
No, it's the invitation of bringing every other, nation's, interscene ethnic squabbles front and center into the country. And it's particularly entertaining, for instance, like Nikki Haley. I mean, the big red flag behind her, besides being a warmongering neocon, was that she had talked about her, lived experiences and the racism she experienced being the only brown kid, which is always sort of this big leftist coded term. And then all of a sudden her son, Nayland, or however it may be pronounced, forgive me, has been going on Twitter just basically calling certain people just non-Americans, or that they're, they should go back to where they came from. They're the meme of two people who look the same on one side of the border saying, we don't like you, go back where you came from, is being played out as we speak. But it does go to show that, okay, well, if this is truly where your priorities are, then what is America doing for you, and what have you given back to the United States? Because if this is the case, so for instance with D'Souza, then I mean your entire corpus of work has been nothing but colorblind, American classical liberal individualism for me. But when it comes to the issues back in my homeland, then it's everything as far right as possible that serves my interest. And we've seen this as well when prior to Trump getting inaugurated, there was a major clip going around on the headlines of a U.S. Navy recruiting center that was ran by, Chinese Americans, and I say that in quotation marks, where not a word of English was spoken in there. It was all Mandarin. And it's just like, okay, on top of all this, we have numerous, Chinese Americans or Chinese individuals who come in on student visas trying to perform, agri-terrorism by bringing in blight and other kinds of fungi that could affect the American agricultural sector. And it raises the uncomfortable question of okay, well, where do we draw the line on this? Because if you're not afraid to be called a racist, then you should be prioritizing the national interest. And that may mean coming at the exclusion of others. And it's the same thing with our industry. We have allowed corporations and others to outsource or allow them to be taken over through ethnic squabbles and ethnic in-group preference, where ethno-narcissism will get tens of thousands of Americans fired only for them to be offshored and sent to companies in India and other parts of Southeast Asia. And I think that that is a damning indictment of our current economic system, that we have allowed the claim or the facade of free market capitalism, of international trade and growth and what's good for the GDP, to functionally allow the average American to be eaten alive by outgroup ethno-narcissism and the lack of protection for American workers. And if the administration was serious about that, they would listen to senators like Eric Schmidt of Missouri, and they would take heed to those that have been warning about this, like the Center for Immigration Studies and others, for the last several decades.
Absolutely. And it's just impossible, again, to not notice that all of the staunchest and loudest proponents of H-1B labor tend to have a particular ethnic background. And it's the same ethnic background that 71% of all H-1B applications approved come from. It's India. Now, I'm sure there are smart people in India, but there's no way that, 3/4 almost of all visas coming to the United States have to come from this one country because everyone there is just so smart. Like, if everyone there was so great and such amazing workers, I imagine India would be a better place, right? And this really draws in the questions about the propositional nation. Can we have this idea of a propositional nation when the people who come in here and say they believe in a proposition, in the case of Vivek and Dinesh and, Nikki Haley, constantly saying how important our proposition is, and this is what makes us who we are, and this is what binds us together, until you notice that actually the proposition means very little to them when kind of the, everything hits the fan. When the chips are down, it turns out that actually the proposition becomes second to kind of this ethnic loyalty. And again, I don't necessarily blame people for having that impulse. Like, that's a very natural impulse. I get that. But you can't sell me yourself as this MLK colorblind standard bearer of anti-racism in the United States and then flip a card and immediately become like the strongest soldiers for India's 1 billion people to come over in the United States. There has to be a very clear delineation there. I can send a guy named Eisenhower to fight the Germans. Like, that tells me something about his level of becoming assimilated. Could I do the same thing with Dinesh? Could I do the same thing with Nikki Haley? I mean, I know she wants to fight every other war, but somehow I feel like if we came to blows with India, there might be a little more questions about where we're sending their troops. So it's not just employment. It becomes a larger question of social fabric. There, of course, as you point out, her son, there are immigrants who are radically pro the United States. I've met them. I've talked with them. They are often our strongest soldiers because they're like, I came here to live among Americans and I want to be the very last person from my country to enter here, so it doesn't become my country, anymore. I want to be in this country. I want to be part of that. But it's clearly not everyone. It's maybe not even a majority, and that is very dangerous when we're talking about bringing so many people in, especially from a specific area. This is always the problem: is it's the diaspora that's the issue. You can probably assimilate 1 or 2 people from almost any country. I mean, there are limits. Don't get me wrong. There are people who are just unassimilable, but you can probably bring in a few people from most countries and work them into the fabric. But when you have large numbers of these people building out communities, I mean, you're in Texas, you've been to the DFW, you know what it looks like over there. These ethnic neighborhoods don't come apart. And we've seen this, someone was just put out some data on the number of Muslim mosques that are being built in Texas. Let me look that up actually real quick while we're talking about it, because it's a shocking number. But you just see the level of ethnic concentration that people have in these areas, and it's insane. So you can't bring in 71% of people through the H-1B program from one country and expect them to assimilate. You're obviously building a beachhead of ethnic, ethnic enclaves in these areas where these people are going to be employed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've seen this already happen in in major American cities where functionally the, Raspail's number in the Camp of the Saints does not equate to any sort of the horrors that we have in places like Dearborn, Michigan, or, we have mayor reelected, but mayor-elect, Jacob Frey, who was famous for standing before the golden idol of a criminal's golden casket in 2020. But he was basically thanking all of the, Somalian clans or various ethnic, groups or identities inside of Somalia that are now in the diaspora that got them elected. And he leveraged that to win over a Somali-born immigrant, Omar Fatah, or however it's pronounced, to basically have the white guy win, so to speak, over the very people that wanted to replace him with someone of their own. And he only managed to get reelected because of taking advantage of the interscene squabbles with that diaspora group. And we've already seen in places like Dearborn and other parts of Michigan where, an Muslim majority city council will tell a white person who has been there their whole life that they are not welcome in this city because they object to, the 5 times a day Muslim prayer call to be used on public services. So, and also I think with Texas, I think it's like 48 mosques in the last 24 months.
Yes, I looked at, it's 48 48 mosques in the last 24 months. So you're getting 24 mosques a year.
Absolute insanity. And I think it's important because you had mentioned, Eisenhower, and that you had said, we had a guy with a German last name go fight a war against the Germans. Keep in mind, in both World Wars, World War I and World War II, there were some people from, of German ancestry that went to go fight for the fatherland, but also at the same time, America functionally killed the ethnic identity or diaspora where the amount of German that was being spoken in the United States and the German language newspapers in places like the Midwest functionally died as the United States entered the war and anti-German sentiment rose because we took on the side of the alliance. And it really does show that that's kind of what it takes in order for that question of which side are you on to emerge. And because the United States hasn't really engaged in a war in any major area outside of maybe the Middle East, and even then after America lost nearly 3,000 people after 9/11 and we killed countless thousands over there, and we lost thousands of our own men and women and thousands more to suicide and drugs after the conflict of our soldiers, that we've only brought millions of more of those people in who share the same views that they had over there, that America's the great Satan, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. And you see this in other places. So I mean, America is experiencing, I think it's we're experiencing a very Anglo moment wherein we're witnessing sort of the level of subcontinental influence in conservative politics in the United States, similar to the Tories in the UK. And we also had our own Sadiq Khan moment, where the largest financial capital and sort of the city America is known for, New York, has been taken over by someone of immigrant and Muslim descent, and is now leading the charge, riding high on non-American votes or foreign-born Americans, paperwork American, just non-Americans voting. And it's incredibly frustrating to witness this all take place. And so for the administration to fumble on messaging is greatly disheartening. And while, yes, we have to be reminded that there has been a lot of steps taken, and Trump hasn't even been in office for a year, and the big, beautiful bill for all of the hiring for ICE and DHS has yet to really come in with boots on the ground. And as we record this, we're having raids in places like Charlotte. We're having raids in places like El Paso and across the other, and across major metropolitan areas. So, I mean, that's good. But at the same time, the administration and really the American right and what's, despite it, fractured and it's fighting itself, we all share a common enemy, which is the fact that there is a system in place, both that has been instituted by our government, but also by large businesses, charities, and foreign dollars pouring in to advocate for the abolition of the American people and the American identity. And as much as there is a claim that America is propositional, we are living in the consequence of what that proposition is. Because, as Tucker Carlson had told Ben Shapiro one time, there's no Nicene Creed of capitalism. There's technically no Nicene Creed of what it means to be an American outside of the oath you take at citizenship. And if we were serious about that, oath at citizenship and the ceremonies that people have when they're sworn in, there's a lot of people who have violated that oath and should easily be deported and denaturalized and sent back to where they came from. But it's a matter of political will. And I understand that we can't have the system crash down on top of all of us. But the basic question of do you want America to survive in any historical form of what it once was is becoming increasingly difficult to answer or even accomplish. Because, at the same time that all of this is happening, we have allegedly conservative leadership. For instance, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, who had famously spent his time, in India promoting a trade deal and more investment into Texas from India, while his own, base is being ethnically replaced for the sake of, greater investment, free trade, and good for what's good for business and not what's good for people. So to witness Dallas, this, city that when I grew up overseas as an Army brat. Like when you said that you were from Texas, people would ask you about Dallas, and then they would ask about the TV show Dallas, which is of course decades old at this point. But it's kind of strange to think that like the Texas of that time frame of the TV show Dallas is all but gone, and it looks more and more like San Francisco. It looks more and more like Dearborn, Michigan, where there are more people on the islands and in the margins trying to panhandle for cash. There are open little homeless encampments under every underpass across 75 and 35. And it's really depressing to know that like this is like red state leadership at work, and this is what's good for us. And with conservatives like these, who needs liberals?
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about the next kind of leg of this H-1B coalition, which is Elon Musk, who is famously, obviously, a partner in crime with Vivek in last year's H-1B raid. And in the sequel, Elon was talking about how, well, there's just no one who will do physical work in the United States, and that's a real problem. There's just nobody who will do that work. Now, first, I know that's an absolute lie because I grew up in a community where construction was critical and where lots of people, many white Americans, were working on job sites on a regular basis. I worked as, doing roofing and these kind of things in the summer to pay for my, for my college. So there were plenty of people, don't get me wrong, there were plenty of people speaking Spanish on the job site, but plenty of people who weren't as well. There are obviously plenty of Americans born in the United States who will do the job. What Elon's really complaining about is he might have to pay some people more, right? And this is kind of an amazing thing. Whenever I have this conversation, people are like, well, I just can't get anyone to do it. Have you raised wages? Well, no, I can't do that. Well, I had a clue as to what might be the issue here. Like, I think I can figure this out. Like, you want to pretend like you are supporting American industry, but you won't pay an American enough to support a kid or buy a home, doing a backbreaking job in the sun. When you're doing that kind of stuff, you have to be compensated for the wear on your body. This is not pushing papers in an office. If you're on the top of a roof or you're lugging, cement around or that kind of thing, tiles, that kind of stuff all day long, it's going to break your body down. You can't work, you can't do the Ben Shapiro. I'll never retire. I'm working to 70. Yeah, it's easy when you're behind a microphone. Yeah, I probably won't retire from doing this intense labor that I'm doing right now. I hopefully will be able to handle that until the Lord takes me away. If I'm too physically disabled to do this, we've got much deeper problems. But if I was a roofer, well, my time at work is shorter. I'm trading equity in my body for this. Now, the funny thing is, the reason you don't get a lot of white guys in these professions at the entry level is they tend to ascend quickly. They're the ones who end up owning the companies. They're the ones who end up being managers. They're the ones who end up being foremen. They tend not to be the guys on the ground every day. But that's, because they can speak English and they tend to be more adept at handling the more complicated aspects, and they tend to rise through the ranks faster. It's not that they didn't enter in at the bottom level, and it's not that you couldn't get more of them to do it if you'd raise their pay. But the smart money is, well, you don't haul tile actually your entire life. You don't climb the ladder your entire life. You do it for the first 10, 15 years. You acquire the skill to run a crew, and then you enter into management or you own your own business. And that's kind of how you retire yourself out of that physical labor while still being inside the industry. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people willing to do it, especially, again, if you actually paid people enough. And this really is annoying with Elon, because this is a guy, with all respect, who has spoken out bravely against ethnic replacement in places like the United Kingdom and even the United States. He comes from South Africa. He knows the consequences of making yourself a minority inside the country. And yet, while he recognizes all these realities and will even speak about them passionately, the minute it comes to affecting his bottom line or, the ability of him to produce a product, all of a sudden those principles just melt away. And this is really the money power problem. Even though Elon knows, just kind of through experience and academically, the impact of the policies he's talking about, when it comes time for him to get his job done, he's just like, well, no, every sacrifice is worth it. Of course, I need to bring people in, whoever I need, whatever I need. I'm not going to to train Americans. I'm not going to pay Americans because that would take time and money. And I want to get everything done as efficiently as I can right now. And so over and over again, despite accurately describing and in many cases heroically advocating on the part of native people in their own country to be able to work and live and have an identity, once brass tacks, once the chips are on the table, we see that Elon will ultimately default back to this, kind of oligarch, whatever, globalism, bring them in as long as it makes my project cheaper and makes it faster. Whatever I need to do, damn the consequences. Like that mentality just seems to re-enter his thinking, and he doesn't seem to have any cognitive dissonance there, right? He just is constantly sitting there saying, well, I don't see the difference. In fact, he got in an argument with a guy, a Roman, a anonymous account called, I think it's like the Roman helmet guy, about, why Rome fell. And, he said accurately, the Anon said, look, it fell not just because of birth rates, but because ultimately it became foreign. There were too many foreign people in its military, and they were allowed in the borders, and it lost its cohesion and identity. And Elon's like, no, it's just the raw number of people. And I understand he's concerned about birth rates, but he has literally made the opposite argument. Like it matters who's in your country. It's not just the volume of humans. It's not just the gross, number of living beings walking around in your country that makes it successful or not. You have to have a particular people. You have to have a particular identity. You have to recognize yourself as a nation. He gets that everywhere else, but when it comes to his own business, all of a sudden he just crashes out on stuff like the H-1Bs.
Yeah, and I mean, it raises the uncomfortable question to where I think that there's going to be a serious economic realignment on these issues where, and it's going to be the same thing that we saw in 2020 as well as in 2016, where there is a re-emphasis on economic populism. How sound that can be for the current system of our government, our economy, remains to be seen. Because you've seen everyone from Bill Ackman to Bill Mitchell and others go out of their way, and maybe Bill Mitchell, I could be wrong, but going out of their way to say, well, if
he's wrong about everything. So
so he's probably on that list too.
Right,
I tried to be specific about who I'm calling out when they post tremendously bad things, but regardless, we can all lump them in together.
Yeah, Lindsey Graham's probably for it. We can just kind of guess.
Yeah, if Lindsey Graham's for it, we can also toss that aside. Also, him doing the photo ops in the midst of all this terrible messaging has just been a bad omen in and of itself. Like, just went golfing with President Trump. Like, no, you stay away, Ladybug. We don't need you. Go away. But nevertheless,
Chris Chan is upon him. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe someone should send him like a Chris Chan medallion as a donation, and this will all be over soon. But until then, I think that the things that these people have claimed is like, if we were to end these programs, we'd fall behind in AI. We'd fall behind and do this. And it's just the majority of these visas are not towards America's tech dominance. They're not. Right. We know this. Data Republican has done an amazing amount of work where you can look up these H-1B visas and where they're going. When everything from 7-Eleven to the janitor, these sort of low-level, entry-level jobs that I would expect a 20-year-old college student to do to pay for his car or something. And even me saying that is an outdated economic model, because you can't really go and pay for your car that way, because now everything's so over-financialized. Our system has fundamentally prioritized everyone but the United States. And so when everyone on this side of things has come out relatively united and said, the American economy serves everyone but America, and we should reorient our focus of putting Americans first, that's a good message. I'm not concerned that AI is going to fall behind. One, because the military is way too invested in that. And two, most of the H-1B visas and our best people that we invite over to come and work there are probably not the people I'm concerned about. I will be if they start handing over that stuff to, foreign countries and foreign powers. All the more reason to have, a greater, security look at all of those issues. But everyone is focused on the fact that even the lowest level jobs or even the entry level positions, when you've lost Fox News to say that like 80% of these jobs are going to middle management or entry or lower level employment jobs, then we have fundamentally screwed the American people over. And for someone like Elon Musk, who has been around on this earth long enough to know what South Africa looked like before the Rainbow Nation took over, then he should have a pretty good idea that if that happens to the United States, if that happens to the one place that has been the most gracious host for him, he could show a little gratitude. And unfortunately, there's not one person in government, it seems right now, who wants to make that point. You are a guest. That does not permit you to walk all over the people who have fought and bled and lived here before you got here. The people who have witnessed their homes get overpriced, or they can no longer afford property taxes because we're building a new tech center. We're building new housing because the cities have gotten so expensive because we keep bringing more people in. You mentioned the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. That's a really good example. The roads are always under construction. It's just like someone who is an addict, where it's just like, if I have one more lane, all of my infrastructure problems will be fixed. No, they won't, because the city has an infrastructure for a city that has way too many millions of people that are there for what we have. Now, that could be fixed, obviously, but it does come to show that between bringing people in from California, which is fine, they usually vote conservative. They helped Ted Cruz get reelected in 2018. That we have prioritized everyone but the United States. And at this point, I think that the voter base, the 70 some odd million Americans that had voted for him, are ready to see these issues actually addressed. Because if not, all that we're going to see are more ordeals of civility over the subcontinent. We're going to see more intellectual property theft be taken over to foreign competitors. And we are going to watch the Republican Party, which has always been a beautiful loser, but be even more of a beautiful loser as it helps sell the country away through the Great Replacement under the guise of free trade, economic growth, and an increase to the American GDP and consumer purchasing power.
Yeah, I just feel like we deserve a better quality of Gilded Age robber barons. Like Carnegie was born in Scotland, I'm pretty sure, and he came over, and then yes, he made a ton of money. People might have issues with how he did that, but ultimately he ended up plowing just infinite amount of his own cash back into the country, building schools, building libraries, building churches, building all these institutions. Now, sadly, his fortune haunts us like a ghost moving across the graveyard in the Carnegie Foundation, but Ford Foundation, many such cases. The point is, ultimately, we used to have this understanding where even if a billionaire came from somewhere else, they understood that they had made their money on the backs of the American people, and now they owed them something. They were going to reinvest in those people, and Musk just seems fundamentally to not care in that way. But speaking of people who are ungrateful to the United States, Vivek Ramaswamy is currently falling behind in his race for the Ohio governorship. Now, Ohio is a state that the Republicans should win walking away. And now Vivek is there. And of course, Vivek has kept all of the positions he had previously, all the mainstream conservative, type positions, talk radio conservative positions you would have expected from kind of a economic, conservative 10 years ago. And he has, despite speaking the language that a lot of kind of boomers speak on this issues, he's managed to lose a large amount of support. And one of the things that they're really hitting him on is the fact that he insulted Americans. His opponent, is it Amy Acton? She was actually directly hitting him from the right on this issue, saying, you said Americans aren't talented. You said Americans are lazy. You said our culture sucks. She's all but saying, hey, we're deporting you, denaturalizing. She's one step away from that. So when Democrats are outflanking you on immigration because you're so weak and so obvious on this, it's funny because a lot of boomers were really excited about Vivek. He says all the right things. He wants to end all these taxes and regulations. And don't we love that, folks? And all of, you and me were just kind of doing the, Breaking Bad screaming in the car meme. No, don't do this. You don't understand. I understand you're blind to what's happening here, but it's going to be bad. And now they put him in this position that should have been a shoo-in, right? And he is blowing the lead. He's falling behind a Democrat in this scenario, specifically because she's hitting him on the H-1B issue, on the immigration issue. And if Republicans can't put people in who are good on this issue, if they can't win on the marquee issue of the MAGA coalition, then what are we doing here? This is just kind of insane. At some point you have to recognize it's not just about his bromides of talking about the free market. Vivek is a bad candidate because he doesn't like Americans, and it's obvious. And even a Democrat is willing to exploit that when it comes down to the race.
Yeah, and this is going to be the strategy I think that a lot of Democrats will take advantage of, because while they've clearly ignored their whole ability to take the plank out of their own eye, that conversation about how do we win young men back, like they're probably going to have a way to do so through calling out immigration, because
Yeah.
I mean, let's be very clear. Amy Acton is going to say these things. If she gets elected, it does not matter. She will say the
Oh, no.
right things to win
Right.
it, and then she will vote to the left of Mao, Stalin,
Absolutely.
and
She'll
everyone
betray
else,
you immediately.
just like a
100%.
good Democrat will.
Right.
So, for all intents and purposes, Amy Acton is lying to you, and she is doing this for the campaign. Is it rhetorically smart? Absolutely. But reminder, she's a leftist. She will run Ohio into the ground if she's elected. Same
Right.
could probably be said for Vivek Ramaswamy. And it is just as tragic that the Republican Party and that Trump and the GOP and the TPUSA chapter in Ohio have gone behind him, and there's not someone who can, better represent Ohio to take the place. And when he announced that he was running, or that people wanted to take JD Vance's Senate spot, who should go, I had argued with individuals like Jeremy Carl, who's a great friend to both of us and a great friend to the administration, that maybe we shouldn't have Vivek in there, and that this would not be in our interest, either for the Senate seat or for the governorship. And unfortunately, this is where we're at. And the GOP has a really nasty tendency to go for, and this is why they're such beautiful losers, because they will pursue diversity, equity, and inclusion for everyone but their voter base. We saw this in the 2020 special elections in the Senate, where we thought, hey, let's have this guy go in there. We saw this in, I think it was in North Carolina against Roy Cooper, the African-American gentleman who had sort of a crazy online history that makes me blush, and that's saying something. And also, of course, most recently with the election in Virginia for the gubernatorial election, that we had someone who was so just this, wonderful, for lack of better terms, the diversity hire of a candidate talking about, Juneteenth and things like that on her Twitter timeline, that she didn't really speak to the issues that mattered to Virginians in the way that got Glenn Youngkin elected the first time. And so it really does come to show that the Republican Party will target and go for anyone but the kind of people that would actually stand up for American interests. We need more, Eric Schmitz in the Senate and in every governor, mansion in America than I do anyone like Vivek Ramaswamy or Amy Acton or even Greg Abbott, for that matter. And Greg Abbott's just recently run or announced his desire to run for another term. So I certainly hope that he's primaried from the right. But it does go to show that the Republican Party will happily sacrifice its base and its own nation on the altar of diversity and looking good to win these cool points for left-wing and liberal approval than it is to stand up for the people that have been torn apart by fentanyl, that has been made overseas and brought in through drug cartels in the United States, that has watched its manufacturing centers become completely deindustrialized, and where, and I don't know how this is relatable for you, Oren, but I've been to too many funerals in my lifetime, and I turn 30 next month, and it's incredibly frustrating to know that, America has been effectively hollowed out, not just by drugs, but by international trade, and that this is what I'm told to vote for, is someone that is just the same guy on the other side of the ticket, who just says the right things and basically has the Black Rifle Coffee brand of conservatism and doesn't actually stand for what America needs at the moment. And I think that that's really the big frustrating part about this entire messaging and media fumble is that all of the goodwill and all of the good things that the administration has done in a very short amount of time has been sort of left to squander when their best advocate and interlocutor was shot in cold blood in open daylight for all of us to see. There are still numerous questions about what the FBI has done. And let's not even forget that the president had, 2 assassination attempts on him in last year. And so I think that it becomes really important that for all these fights and squabbles that people want to have over the Heritage Foundation or Tucker Carlson or all these inquisitions over, is my Christianity going to be a problem in the Republican or right-wing think tank sphere, that there are much bigger issues at hand, and it is about the existential crisis of whether or not America as we know it gets to survive. Pat Buchanan was a prophet when he said, will America survive to 2025? I don't know. We've got a little more than a month and a half to go, and I guess we'll find out, but a lot of work needs to be done.
Yeah, getting right over that finish line. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here, but it's always a pleasure to host the Prudentialist. Now, this is a pre-recorded episode today, so we can't take any super chats. Very sorry about that. But Prudentialist, can you tell me or tell the people where to find your great work?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oren, thank you so much for having the time to record with me. I know with our schedules, it's not as easy as it used to be, but for the super chatters, we agree with you. We thank you. We disagree with you.
We love
hate
you all.
We
Yes.
love you all. We love chat. We hate chat. You're the third
Right.
chair of all podcasts. But you can find my work over on Substack, theprudentialist.substack.com. I'm on Twitter as Mr. Prudentialist. I'm on YouTube. You can find me anywhere where you see that usual amphibian or you see my face on here. My podcast on all podcast platforms is known as Prudent Observations with the Prudentialist, and my words have been found in Blaze's Frontier magazine. I've been a frequent guest here, and as always, I'm thankful to be on.
Absolutely. Make sure you're checking out the Prudentialist if somehow you have not at this point. Of course, if you are here for the first time on YouTube, you need to click the bell notifications, all that stuff, so you know when we go live. Make sure to subscribe. And if you would like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Oren McIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. When you do, leave a rating or review. It really helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.